Since its explosive debut in 1985, The Return of the Living Dead has carved out quite a blood-soaked, punk-fueled legacy in the horror genre, while setting itself apart from the slow, shambling footsteps of traditional zombie cinema. What initially began as a semi-sequel to George A. Romero's iconic Night of the Living Dead quickly evolved into a franchise with a voice and scream all its own. Over the decades, the series has grown to include 5 films, each laced with splatter-heavy horror, dark comedy, and counterculture irreverence that has kept its cult status firmly intact. Now, what made Return of the Living Dead so groundbreaking was its ability to break the rules of the whole zombie subgenre. These were not just Romero's ghouls, they were faster, smarter, and most terrifyingly, unkillable. Brains became their only craving, and formaldehyde-soaked corpses pretty much danced to a punk rock soundtrack. The first film's self-aware tone, grimy aesthetic, and punk ethos injected new life into a genre that was beginning to calcify, not just by satirizing zombie tropes, but reinventing them. Over the years, the franchise simply adapted to the changing trends in horror, sometimes leaning into slapstick comedy, and other times diving deeper into apocalyptic horror. Despite tonal shifts and varying quality across sequels, the series has remained a vital chapter in the evolution of zombie cinema. Its impact can be seen in everything from horror comedies like Shaun of the Dead to modern genre benders that embrace absurdity and gore in equal measure. So, without wasting another moment, let's take a gander at the entire lore of this iconic franchise. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Overview of the Return of the Living Dead franchise over the years. So, the origins of the Return of the Living Dead franchise trace back to a creative split between 2 horror legends, John A. Russo and George A. Romero. After co-writing the groundbreaking Night of the Living Dead in 1968, the two of them had different visions for where the story should go next, and in order to settle the dispute, they made a deal. Romero would continue with his series under the title Dead, thus leading to films like Dawn of the Dead, while Russo would develop his sequels using the Living Dead name. This way, both of them could carry on the legacy in their own direction without stepping on each other's undead toes. With that agreement in place, Russo went on to write a novel called Return of the Living Dead before planning to turn it into a movie. The film rights were eventually picked up in 1979, but the project bounced around between studios and directors for a while. At one point, horror master Tobe Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame was attached to direct, and Russo even wrote a script for him. But when Hooper left the project, the script was shelved, and Return of the Living Dead was left in limbo, at least for a little while. After Tobe Hooper stepped away, John A. Russo teamed up with Dan O'Bannon, the screenwriter behind Alien, in order to give Return of the Living Dead a fresh start. Together, they wrote a new script and even released a novel version to go along with it. To clear up any confusion between their story and George A. Romero's Dead series, they cleverly added a scene where a character explains that Romero's films were based on true events, but this is the real story. It was a very tongue-in-cheek way of saying, we're doing our own thing, and it really worked in their favor. Now, one of the biggest ways the Return series stood out was in its tone. Unlike Romero's bleak, socially conscious horror, Return of the Living Dead leaned into dark comedy, blending slapstick and gore with a punk rock attitude. The result was something that felt wild, rebellious, and totally fresh for the genre. Although Russo and O'Bannon only stayed involved with the first film, their blueprint really stuck because every sequel that came after them explicitly tried to follow the rules they set, including the infamous idea that these zombies cannot be killed by a shot to the head and only want one thing: brains. On another interesting note, the 4th and 5th films were shot back-to-back near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. They were originally meant for a theatrical release, but edited versions ended up premiering on the Sci-Fi Channel, which is now known as Sci-Fi, on October 15th, 2005, before getting a DVD release. While these later entries were a far cry from the original's brilliance, they still carried traces of the chaotic energy that made Return of the Living Dead such an unforgettable ride. The Return of the Living Dead, 1985. Starting with the iconic film that jump-started this legendary franchise, in The Return of the Living Dead, we see a medical supply warehouse foreman, Frank, informing his new protege, Freddy, how Night of the Living Dead was based on true events that occurred when trioxine gas was released into the morgue in the basement of a Pittsburgh VA hospital, causing the bodies to jerk around as if they were alive. Luckily, the military was able to get a handle on the situation and clean up the spill and the infected corpses. Unfortunately, the story was leaked, and the military said the Night of the Living Dead could be made based on that, but they had to change the story around and say it was fictional. Through a clerical error, a few barrels containing the trioxine-infected bodies were shipped to the warehouse and have remained there for years. But a skeptical Freddy doesn't buy it, so Frank takes him to the basement and shows him the barrels, where they see the now mummified remains of the body. When Freddy is scared about the barrels' durability, Frank reassures him of the solid military construction of the barrels by slapping it on the side, which inherently causes a leak of the gas, poisoning and knocking out the two, as we see the glass on the lid break open and the body starts to liquefy. While this is happening, Freddy's girlfriend Tina and her friends are going to pick up Freddy from the warehouse. They arrive early and, in an effort to pass the time, decide to hang out in the cemetery next door. Meanwhile, Freddy and Frank awaken to see that the body in the canister is gone, and they assume it dissolved upon contact with air. They then head upstairs to try and sort things out, only to hear a strange noise coming from one of the shelves. Upon investigating, they find out that the half-dog anatomy display has returned to life and the dog was whimpering. Naturally, Freddy and Frank proceed to freak out and bash the dog with a walking crutch. But other things in the warehouse, such as the dead butterfly display, have also returned to life, culminating in the screams of the now reanimated cadaver in the freezer. After several minutes of panic, the two decide to call their boss, Bert, and the three devise a plan to try and stop the zombie based on the method that worked in Night of the Living Dead. You know, by bashing it in the head. Anyways, upon opening the freezer, the cadaver runs for Bert, and after wrestling it to the ground, Bert staples it to the floor with a pickaxe to the head. Despite this, the body continues to thrash around, even after they cut off its head with a bone saw. So they decide to take it over to the mortuary next door and see Bert's old friend, Ernie Kaltenbrunner, and have it cremated. Funnily enough, when the pickaxe to the head doesn't work, one character mentions how it worked in the movie, directly referencing Night of the Living Dead. Meanwhile, back in the cemetery, night has fallen, and Tina is worried about Freddy, as he should have been off work by now, and so she leaves the group to go investigate. We then see Tina trying to find Freddy at the warehouse, and as she makes her way downstairs, she's greeted by the dripping body from the canister, the Tar Man, who asks for one thing: brains. A scared Tina then escapes to a metal locker, barring the door from within, but the Tar Man still hooks up a winching chain to the door and proceeds to use the winch to pull the door off. Following this, at the mortuary, Bert, Freddy, and Frank convince Ernie to cremate the sawed-up remains of the still-twitching freezer cadaver, but the furnace releases the gas from the zombie into the clouds, causing it to rain. The rain, then contaminated with the trioxine, began burning their skin, thus forcing the gang out of the cemetery to their car. And when the car's convertible roof starts to leak, they run inside the warehouse. Upon entering, they hear Tina's screams from the basement and rush to help. The group see the door slowly being pulled off the locker, and as they push back a curtain blocking their view of the basement floor, the Tar Man is revealed, who bites the top off of Suicide's skull. This gives enough time for Tina to escape the locker and run to join her friends as they escape the basement. Fleeing the Tar Man and the warehouse, they make a run for the mortuary, having seen some men enter it earlier. During this time, the rain has been seeping into the ground, and as a result, it soaks into the coffins of the corpses, causing them all to reanimate. But as the group takes refuge at the entrance to a mausoleum, they can hear the muffled screams and pounding of the dead under the earth before they spot the skeletal remains of a corpse rising from the ground, with its eyes opening and jaw dropping. The group then proceeds to run in panic and splits up. Tina, Spider, and Scuzz head for the mortuary, while Chuck and Casey head back to the warehouse, with only Trash remaining behind in the graveyard. Unfortunately, she falls into a puddle of muddy water, only to be surrounded by a group of undead who proceed to eat her. During this time at the mortuary, Frank and Freddy are starting to feel very sick and all look deathly ill. So as Ernie calls the paramedics, Tina, Spider, and Scuzz show up claiming that there are bodies getting up out of the ground in the cemetery. The paramedics arrive at the rear entrance and find that by all medical reasoning, Frank and Freddy are dead and shouldn't be moving around. The paramedics want to get them to the hospital for further protesting and go to get the stretcher, but they're subsequently attacked by the zombies from the graveyard, who proceed to request that the dispatch send more paramedics. The mortuary is then attacked by the zombies at the front of the building, and the remaining people start to board up the place. They then hear the second ambulance arriving and are witness to its instant mobbing and attack by the zombies. Following this, one of the boarded windows in the storage room is broken open and needs to be reinforced. During this, Scuzz is killed, but Ernie manages to snag half of the zombie that did it and subdues her. They then take her back to the embalming room and tie her down and ask her questions. She's able to respond as a normal person would, despite not having a lower half and suffering from decades of rot and decay. When they ask her why they attack and feed on people, she corrects Ernie and says, not people, but brains. Apparently, consuming brains helps these reanimated corpses not feel the pain of death, as they can feel their bodies rotting, and it hurts to be dead. On the other hand, police have been sent to investigate the two ambulances who were not reporting, but the zombies get to them and speak on the radio to send more cops. Meanwhile, Frank and Freddy are slowly becoming zombies and are moved to the chapel area to be sealed in. Tina decides to stay with Freddy, who dies, reanimates, and then tries to attack her. When she screams for help, the others come and splash acid in Freddy's eyes before locking him into the chapel. During this time, Frank takes matters into his own hands and before he could turn, makes his way to the cremation furnace and incinerates himself. Seeing the chaos, the group decides to escape and ask help by using the police car as their getaway vehicle. As Bert and Spider make a run to the car, they're able to get in and move it to the door of the mortuary. However, they quickly become surrounded by zombies and decide to leave without the others. They're able to make their way to the warehouse where they phone the police to warn them of the situation. The police then set up a blockade around the area of the cemetery and send in several squad cars, which were again directed into the scene by a zombie wearing a policeman's rain gear. The cars are attacked again, which is witnessed by the helicopter overhead. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Casey and Chuck greet Bert and Spider and report that they trapped a zombie in the office. Unfortunately, the telephone is in the same office, and Bert suggests the one in the basement, but the teens tell him about Tarman. But Bert decides to try for the basement and knock the Tarman's head off with a bat as they open the door. This allows them to get to the phone and call the police and ask to speak to the person in charge of the blockade. But as they are all connected, the zombies rush the blockade and we see the commander being taken down by a now zombified trash. After hearing the noises from the phone, a disheartened Bert calls the number on the side of the barrel and is connected to Colonel Horace Glover, who gets some information from Bert about location, time of occurrence, number of zombies, etc. Bert is then transferred again and explains to the teens that apparently the army has been expecting something like this to happen for a very long time and has a plan in place to deal with it. Back at the mortuary, Ernie and Tina have escaped to the attic area of the embalming room as Freddy breaks out of the chapel screaming for Tina's brain. We then see how the colonel is connected to an artillery post and provides coordinates and clearance to launch a small-yield nuclear attack at the location of the cemetery. All of these scenes culminate with the sound of the nuclear shell being fired while Bert is still on hold. Freddy is breaking into the attic with Ernie pointing his gun at Tina's head after planning on killing her and himself to avoid being eaten, and finally, the zombies standing and staring at the sky. Soon, we hear a long whistle of a shell falling, and finally, after a shot of a small nuclear explosion, the film ends with the general stating to his superior officers that the strike seems to have been successful and that reports are coming in of the only side effects being a little acid rain. The general then assures his superiors that this won't affect the president's trip to Louisville tomorrow morning, and finally, we come to the last scene of a darkened cemetery and a skeletal zombie rising from its grave, alerting us that it really hasn't ended. The Return of the Living Dead Part 2, 1988, the second installment of the franchise, was written and directed by Ken Wiederhorn, who once again brings us in the middle of a zombie outbreak in Louisville, Kentucky. When a military truck is transporting barrels of trioxine, one breaks loose and falls into a river without the driver noticing. Now, the next morning, Johnny and Billy take a reluctant Jesse Wilson to a cemetery mausoleum for a group initiation with a group of preteen bullies. A frightened Jesse then flees into a nearby sewer sewer, where he and the others stumble across the rogue barrel. Upon inspection, they find a corpse inside and run away screaming as the toxic gas contained within begins to slowly leak out. Later, when Jesse says he's going to call the army from a number on the barrel, the bullies trap him in the derelict mausoleum and leave him. Eventually, Billy and Johnny return to the barrel and open it, releasing all the trioxine gas that begins to permeate the whole cemetery. We then see a trio of grave robbers. Ed, Joey, and Brenda arrive in a van. While Brenda stays behind in the van, Ed and Joey go into the cemetery where they start to loot the tombs in the mausoleum where Jesse is still locked in. When they enter it, Jesse is finally able to break free and run home. Meanwhile, the acid rainfall causes the trioxine gas to seep into the ground and resuscitate all the corpses once again. During this time, Jesse returns home and is ordered to do his homework by his older sister, Lucy, but the boy sneaks out of the house when a cable repairman distracts her. Jesse then goes to Billy's house to see him and finds out that he has suddenly fallen ill, so he makes up an excuse and Billy's mother allows him in for a brief visit. He was actually suffering from the effects of trioxine, but Billy warns Jesse not to tell anyone what they've found. But Jesse still returns to the sewer to further examine the barrel, and after seeing a tar-covered zombie, he flees to the cemetery, where the newly resurrected bodies have started to dig their way out of the ground. Meanwhile, Brenda goes to check on our companions and encounters a zombie, but is able to get away. Ed and Joey, on the other hand, are still inside the mausoleum when a corpse comes to life. In response, Joey smashes its head with a crowbar, and they flee the building, only to run through a mob of zombies before meeting a hysterical Brenda. Meanwhile, Jesse gets home and tries to tell Lucy about the zombie uprising, but she dismisses him and locks him in his room. Elsewhere, Ed, Joey, and Brenda show up at Billy's house to get help, but they run away when Billy's dad pulls out a shotgun on them. During this time, Jesse starts a fire outside his door to set off the smoke alarms and distract Lucy so he can escape. Jesse then calls the army and gets through to Colonel Glover, but the call gets disconnected. On the other hand, Ed, Joey, and Brenda steal Tom's van but fail to get through the zombie horde, so they barge into Jesse's house. As Joey begins to fall ill from trioxine exposure, the zombies close in on the house, pushing the grave robbers to find a getaway car. They somehow manage to break into a doctor's house, convince him to let them use his car, and then drive to a hospital emergency room that appears to be deserted. Elsewhere, at Billy's house, his condition worsens, and his father leaves to get a doctor, but gets attacked and eaten by a group of zombies, moments before a fully turned Billy attacks his mother. We then see Tom, Lucy, and Jesse escape a group of zombies and take the car to look around town. They somehow make it to Lucy and Jesse's grandfather's house and break into his gun safe to get weapons and ammo. They then go back to the hospital where Ed and Joey are experiencing symptoms of rigor mortis. Unfortunately, Jesse is suddenly attacked by a zombie that both he and Tom shot multiple times. On the other hand, Brenda is upset about the diagnosis for Joey, and they try to leave in the car, but Ed follows them and gets in the car. When they're stopped at gunpoint by the National Guardsmen under Glover's command, a fully zombified Ed attacks and kills one of the soldiers, causing his squad mates to flee. This allows Brenda to drive away with Joey, leaving Ed behind. But then Brenda is attacked by a zombified Joey, and because she could not kill her former lover, she willfully lets him cannibalize her. Meanwhile, after fleeing in a stolen ambulance, the survivors come to a roadblock, and the National Guard mistakenly opens fire on them, thinking they are zombies. On the other hand, after realizing that the whole town had been evacuated, Tom thinks of a new strategy to give the zombies what they want and drives them to a meatpacking plant. They then take a truck and distribute brains out of the back as they drive to a power plant, intending to electrocute them all. As Billy opens the gate, the zombies corner them into the truck. When Billy attacks Jesse, he stabs him with a screwdriver and then activates the power, killing all of the zombies. As Billy walks in, holding the screwdriver, Jesse pushes his tormentor into a large transformer that falls through the roof. The film ends as Glover and his men arrive to contain the scene and lead the others away.
Killer! Killer, please!
The Return of the Living Dead Part 3, 1993. The third part of the franchise was produced and directed by Brian Yuzna, who produced the Reanimator film series. This film basically switches gears from the first two films' comedy-horror formula into a romantic horror film. When Kurt Reynolds steals his father's security key card, he and his girlfriend, Julie Walker, decide to explore the military base where his father works. They then sneak into a hangar and observe Kurt's father, Colonel John Reynolds, Colonel Peck, and Colonel Sinclair Sinclair oversee an experiment with a corpse. They see how the corpse is exposed to trioxine gas, which reanimates it into a zombie. The military basically intends to use the zombies in warfare as expendable soldiers. However, once reanimated, the zombies are really difficult to control, and to solve this problem, Sinclair would like to attach the zombies to exoskeletons, which could be locked down when the zombies were not in battle. But Reynolds takes a different approach, as his scientists have developed a method of paretic infusion to paralyze the zombie until it's needed. They fire a chemical bullet into the forehead of the zombie, which creates a localized endothermic reaction that apparently freezes the creature's brain. At first, the paretic infusion test looks successful, but the effect wears off much quicker than they expected, and the reanimated zombie comes back to life and proceeds to bite Dr. Hickox's fingers off. The zombie then proceeds to bash Hickox against a wall until he's dead. Now that he was infected by the zombie, Hickox is reanimated as another zombie and starts biting one of the other technician's legs while the technician begs and pleads for mercy. Luckily, Hickox is paralyzed with the chemical bullets, and everyone in the room is quarantined. But the magnitude of this failure comes at a cost, as it causes Reynolds to be reassigned to Oklahoma City and Sinclair to be promoted to head of the project. Now, when Reynolds informs Kurt that they will be moving again, Kurt refuses and storms out of home, riding off on his motorcycle with Julie. While the bike speeds down the road, Julie playfully grabs Kurt's crotch, and this causes Kurt to lose control of the motorcycle, veering into the path of an oncoming truck, which swerves and slams strongly into the road guardrail. As a result, Julie flies off the bike, slams violently against a telephone pole, and dies instantly by neck breaking. A distraught Kurt then brings Julie's corpse back to the military base, and using his father's keycard again, he sneaks her in and uses the trioxine gas to reanimate her. Now, Julie initially seems perfectly normal, but soon starts exhibiting symptoms, such as pain and hunger that cannot be satiated by regular food. But now that she was revived, the two escape on Kurt's bike, and to curb Julie's intense hunger, Kurt drives to a store. Unfortunately, inside the store, Kurt runs afoul with a gang, thus leading to a struggle that results in the shopkeeper being shot by a member of the gang. As they run from the store, Julie bites the shooter's arm. Kurt and Julie then run away from authorities in a van with the wounded shopkeeper. However, Julie is now overcome by her hunger for brains and attacks him by eating some of his brains. Meanwhile, as the shooter's health declines due to Julie's bite, the gang attempts to track Kurt and her down. This is why Julie and Kurt hide from the gang in the sewers, where they encounter a vagrant named Riverman who shelters them. Julie then discovers that extreme pain seems to temporarily make the cravings to feed on humans go away, so she mutilates her flesh with various items of junk found around Riverman's lair, until she's very graphically adorned with spikes, nails, and shards of glass sticking out of her flesh, which later comes in handy. During this time, the gang somehow tracks Julie and Kurt down. In a very messy confrontation with the gang, Julie uses her new body decorations to stab, beat, and otherwise kill several of the members. But unfortunately, Julie's body becomes accustomed to the pain, and she turns on Riverman, infecting and killing him. Meanwhile, the entire gang reanimates before the military arrives and neutralizes all of the zombies. Finally, after a lot of drama, when the zombies are captured, Kurt realizes Julie is going to be used as a weapon and goes into a rage, thus freeing all the zombies, which then kill the soldiers. In the commotion, the base is then set on fire and Kurt is bit. Even though Kurt's father tries to get him to leave, Kurt realizes that he would be abandoning Julie and also knows he is infected. So Kurt brings Julie to the furnace, and when she asks where they are, Kurt says they were exactly where they belonged, before kissing her one last time. The movie ends as his father watches in horror as Kurt and Julie deliberately climb inside the crematorium. The two lovers then share a final embrace as the flames surround them and the screen fades out. Return of the Living Dead, Necropolis, 2005. Set 10 years after Return of the Living Dead 3, the film starts out with Charles Garrison traveling to Chernobyl to collect the last 6 canisters of trioxine 5. When 2 Russian sellers take him to an empty power station which contains the trioxine gas, one of the Russians gets trioxine in his hands, turning him into a zombie. Upon hearing screams, Garrison runs to see the zombie eating the other Russian partner and promptly shoots it in the head. It is then revealed that Julian and Jake Pyro Garrison, the nephew of Charles's parents, were volunteers who died a year earlier at Hybritech. When Julian leaves the house to go motorbiking with his friends, during a stunt, one of his friends, Zeke, falls and gets knocked unconscious. At the hospital, a doctor tells Julian that Zeke had an unexplained reaction to the painkillers and is pronounced dead on arrival. Soon, one of Julian's friends, Katie, works at Hybritech and notices Zeke being brought in. They then manage to hack their way into the Hybritech website and find out that Zeke was used as a test subject and decide to rescue him. Meanwhile, Charles is experimenting with the trioxine and manages to reanimate an arm and a corpse. However, some of the gas manages to escape through the pipes and reanimates a dead rat that two homeless men were eating, and it proceeds to attack them. On the other hand, by using fake IDs, Julian and his friends manage to get into Hybritech, with Katie at the security center giving them advice over walkie-talkies. As they end up sneaking through the ventilation shaft, they find out that Pyro had followed them. They then get out of the vent and find themselves in an armory, and after some searching, they're found by Charles, who shows them where Zeke really is. The group soon discovers a room full of zombie clones, leading Uncle Charles to explain that they're to be the new test subjects. He also reveals that Julian's parents are alive and being experimented upon. But when Charles tries to escape, Katie tries to deactivate the alarm, and in the process, she releases all the zombies in the complex. During the chaos, Zeke is bitten on the neck by a zombie, and the group manages to make it to the armory and escape into the vents. Eventually, as Julian, Carlos, and Cody separate from the group to find Julian's parents, Zeke, Becky, and Pyro manage to make it to the parking lot and are able to find keys to a Jeep. Unfortunately, Zeke turns into a zombie and tries to eat them, causing them to crash. Meanwhile, Julian has found the building where his parents are being held. He finds his zombie parents in a holding tank and sees they have been suited up with circular saws and miniguns to become Uber soldiers. Cody's insistence, Julian reluctantly agrees to leave the room, and they get chased by zombies up to the roof. A few minutes later, Charles appears in the room with Julian's parents and releases them from the tanks. While Julian and Cody manage to rappel down the building, at the bottom, they encounter the zombified Mimi and Hector. As a result, Julian picks up a dead security guard's gun and tries to shoot them, but the gun turns out to be empty. Luckily for them, Katie appears in a new truck and runs the zombies over. Julian and Cody then get in the truck and they go off to find the others. Meanwhile, Pyro and Becky have gotten out of the Jeep and are fending off zombies. Pyro fought them with a homemade flamethrower, while Becky shot them with a handgun. We then see Zeke run towards Becky, but Pyro pushes her out of the way and has the back of his head eaten instead. Becky somehow manages to scare Zeke off just before Katie arrives in the truck to pick her up and escape the zombies. As they drive, Julian's dad surprisingly appears and shoots the truck with the minigun. After he's finished shooting, Becky gets out of the truck and throws a grenade at him, nearly destroying him. Finally, they all get out of the truck and start running, but encounter Zeke and Julian's mother on the way. Zeke starts a fist fight with Julian, whilst the group try to destroy Julian's zombified mother. Eventually, they succeed, while Julian manages to destroy Zeke. Soon, the SWAT team arrives and shoots the remaining zombies, including Julian's dad, while also mistakenly shooting Katie. The movie ends with the SWAT team disposing of the bodies, and Uncle Charles escaping with the barrels of trioxine. In the closing scene of the movie, we see a newscaster reporting about a supposed zombie outbreak which Hybritech denies. Ironically, the scene ends with the newscaster being attacked by a zombie as the screen goes black. Return of the Living Dead, Rave to the Grave, 2005. So, Rave to the Grave was filmed immediately after Necropolis, using the same locations of Romania and Ukraine. The film takes place 1 year after Necropolis, where the returning teenage characters from the previous film are now college freshmen. It opens with Charles Garrison arriving at a mortuary with a canister of trioxine, where he's greeted by a team of Interpol agents who aim to destroy the last canisters to avoid another incident. Nevertheless, one of them sprays 3 corpses with the gas and revives them. Charles is unfortunately killed during the incident, along with the mortuary owner and one of the government officials. The scene then skips to Halloween, where we see Jenny with Julian, Cody, and Becky, the last 3 survivors of the previous film. They're now in college and receive notice of the murder of Charles. Following this, when Julian and Jenny search for and possibly sell what belonged to Charles, they find the last 2 barrels of trioxine. One is taken to Cody, who tests the chemical inside it. Meanwhile, Jeremy, Jenny's brother, tastes the chemical, as he thought that it was a drug similar to ecstasy, but then he goes into a spasm in which he foams at the mouth, and later describes what it was like. The chemical is named Z for its zombie-like effect on the living. Cody, Jeremy, and Shelby then extract the chemical from the canister and put the liquid extract into pills, which they sell to Skeet, so he can sell the drug around the school. While Skeet informs everyone to only take one pill at a time for health reasons, most of them take more than one pill at a time, which speeds up the process that causes humans to reanimate as zombies. Soon, Gino and Aldo Serra, the only survivors from the beginning of the movie, recognize what is going on when they're shown the severed head of one of the zombies. They go to question Julian, knowing he's the only one familiar with trioxine, but he doesn't tell them anything about the canisters that he and Jenny discovered. Sometime later, people are rapidly turning into zombies as the drug is being passed around a rave and getting out of control. In the chaos, Cody and Shelby are killed before Jenny kills a zombified Jeremy. Following this, seeing no other option, Aldo calls in military assistance, but he's told that an American bomber plane is already on the way to the rave location. As the plane launches a bomb, it detonates in the center of the rave. In the aftermath, as Jenny and Julian emerge from the rubble alive, Aldo asks where Gino is and tries to find him, as it's still unclear if Gino died during the blast. At the film's end, we see the Tar Man desperately trying to hitchhike a ride to the party, but to no avail. After scaring away a woman who almost gave him a ride, he has no choice but to walk to the party, yelling his trademark hook line, "Brains," as he goes by. Funny, right? Well, that was the lore of all the 5 movies within the Return of the Living Dead franchise. With that being said, back in 2023, the franchise announced a reboot, and from what we can gather on the internet, it seems like a new Return of the Living Dead is in the works already. Promised to be set in the winter of 1985, which is 18 months after the events in the original film, this reboot will be directed by Steve Walsh and is supposed to be hitting the big screens by December 2025. Now, what do you guys think will be the next adventure in this undead world? Tell me your thoughts and theories in the comment box below.